Hi, I'm Bill Jack with Worldview Academy. It is so good to be back here in Oregon. Well, wait. I'm not in Oregon, I'm in Colorado. Welcome to the Ocean Virtual Convention, all you attendees. I am pleased to be back with you, even virtually. The lectures you're about to see are in two parts. Number one is the introduction to worldviews, so you can train your students how to recognize opposing worldviews, followed by critical thinking, in which you and your student can learn 4 questions that will stand you in good stead no matter what the topic. I encourage you to check out the informational video on Worldview Academy leadership camps that follows. Once again, thanks for attending the Ocean Virtual Convention. What is a worldview? That's the first question that pops into your head, right? Well, a worldview is often described as one's framework for understanding existence. It is illustrated as a set of glasses, a set of lenses through which one filters reality. There are 2 big questions that frame one's worldview. What is the nature of God? And what is the nature of man? You answer those 2 questions, I will tell you your worldview. It's not because it's a magical formula or because I'm brilliant. It's just because those 2 questions clearly separate different worldviews, especially a biblical worldview from everything else. At Worldview Academy, we say that there are 4 categories of worldviews. There's theism, which comes from the Greek word theos, meaning, of course, God. It's a God-centered worldview. 3 world religions are in that category. There's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. The opposite of a theistic worldview would be an atheistic worldview or atheistic worldview. Meaning no. So it is the belief in no God. Then there's polytheism. Poly means many, not little bitty like many, but many gods. Now we think of the Greeks and Romans when we think of polytheism. However, you may have neighbors, I do, who are polytheists. In this nation, Mormons are polytheists. And then there is pantheism. Pan means all. Everything is God. I'm God. You're God. My shirt is God. I know you're thinking that is an ugly God, but everything is God. So those are the 4 categories and the 2 questions that frame one's worldview. However, I think we can boil those 4 categories down into 2 because either God is or God isn't. And I'm going to expand the questions from 2 to several more. In order to trust what I'm about to say to you, you need to understand my worldview. Otherwise, I could scam you. I hold to a theistic worldview. And a theistic worldview answers certain basic questions differently than every other worldview. The first question any good worldview attempts to answer is, what is really real? For example, in Hindu countries, they believe that this life that we lead is nothing more than illusion, a fantasy. So science would not develop in such cultures. Who wants to go out and test, observe, repeat, study, which is the scientific method, illusion. So science developed in cultures that held that the ultimate reality is to know the Creator. How did the universe come into existence? Is the next question. The universe, too, was created. Notice everything hinges on point number 1. The universe was created, ex nihilo, out of nothing. What about people? How did you and I come to be? Well, we too are created. Therefore, man owns a biological machine, but that's not all there is. He also owns a living soul. And then what about history? History, too, hinges on point number one. History is linear. Just like a line has a beginning point and an ending point, so does history, and the purpose of the Creator is worked out into history. What about marriage, family, law, government? What about those institutions that make up our culture, our society? Well, those too are revealed by the Creator. Ethics, for example, the system of right and wrong, is revealed and absolute. At this point, somebody might challenge you and say, well, then why do we have problems in the world? If there is a God who created everything and He's in charge, why is there evil in the world? And the answer from a biblical perspective is that man rebelled against the revealed absolutes, and therefore man became imperfect. Our only hope, therefore, is regeneration through Jesus Christ. Now, this is the point at which the three world religions that are theistic separate from one another. It's the J word, the person of Jesus. The Muslim says that Jesus was a prophet. The Jew is looking for a Messiah who is yet to come. The Christian says, no, He has come once. When He returns, He will come again in judgment. The final question that any good worldview will attempt to answer is, what about death? From a theistic perspective, death is either the gate to life with the Creator and His people forever, or it's the gate to separation from the Creator and His people forever. If you've ever been separated from reality, you know that that is a hellish experience. We institutionalize people who are separated from reality. We isolate them. That is exactly what hell will be. It is a place of torment and torture where the worm does not die, the fire is not quenched, but beyond that, it is a conscious realization that one is separated from the only person who can bring peace and fulfillment to his existence. And that is, again, the Creator. That's a theistic worldview. I'm assuming that most who are watching, if not all, hold to this, or at least are familiar to this. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be enrolled in this course. But I want you to shift mindsets. I want you to change your thinking and think from the opposing worldview. The opposing worldview is one that I call secularism. Now, secularism is the belief that there may or may not be a God, but even if there is a God, He is irrelevant. Secularism is an umbrella term under which you find various denominations, just as you do in Christendom. You find all the various denominations. But secularism is this umbrella term. You will find Marxism under this, which holds the proletariat as the highest reality, or humanism, which says that man is the highest being in the universe, or naturalism. All there is nature, and everything comes from nature. So when it comes to the first question, what is the ultimate reality? There is one word that sums it all up. The ultimate reality is chance. How can chance be a reality, you might ask? Well, let's go through the questions. How did the universe come into existence according to a secular worldview? By chance. What about people? Well, people too are a product of this random chance process. So man does not own a biological machine. Man is a biological machine, period. Now, what do you do with the machine when it wears out, breaks down, you can't fix it? You trash it, bash it, smash it. We have too many unwanted eating machines. We're fast running out of natural resources. So what's a natural outpouring of this particular worldview? Abortion. Or, on the other end of life, euthanasia. Ideas do have consequences, and worldviews matter. History, too, hinges on point number one. History, too, is a product of chance. So history, basically, is a series of random chance events without purpose or meaning. Where do we get our institutions of marriage, family, law, government? Well, as man evolved, man saw a need for government. So man created government. Man saw a need for law or family or marriage. But because man is continually evolving, so are his institutions. So when it comes to ethics, the system of right and wrong, What was wrong yesterday may be right today, and what was right yesterday may be wrong today. In other words, ethics is relative. Since there are no absolutes against which man can rebel, man can become perfect, or at least perfected, perfectible. Our only hope is man. Our only hope is ourselves. But is this true? Or is this what is called a straw man argument? One that is easy to knock down, but is not truly representative of the secularist position. We're going to go out and interview some secularists, and we're going to ask them these questions. First, we're going to interview is a vegan. No, not a Vulcan, live long and prosper, but a vegan. Now, what's a vegan? Not just a vegetarian, but someone who will not use any animal byproducts whatsoever. So we're going to ask these questions and see how he responds. Are there to vegetarianism as far as our culture goes? How does that solve the problems that we're facing? John Robbins, for example, wrote A Diet for a New America. And I heard him speak one time, and he said that if we stopped eating meat, I believe the percentage was we would cut down on 90% of the world's problems. Now, he wasn't just talking about health problems. He was talking about crime and war and exploitation. Would you agree with him, and then why?
Yes, I would. And I think it comes down to really how we view the planet. And I think right now, particularly the Western nations, view the planet as resources to be exploited. And I think that's very likely going to be the downfall of our species and possibly many others on this planet. And I think we're starting to see some of the toll of that. And so I do agree with that view, because I think starting out with, there's a lot of problems with violence, and people wonder, well, where is this violence coming from? Yet because I'm in the animal protection, I see violence around me all the time. Most people, when they sit down to dinner, have a very violent plate of dead animal in front of them. And I just think there's a overcoming of concerns for these type of things, which then blanket out and create other problems. And so I think it's a matter of values and valuing life, all life. And I think the planet could, I think the human society could benefit from that.
Notice he said it's a matter of valuing not just life, but all life. What question would you like to have for him? When it comes to a person's worldview, one of the things you do is you push them to be consistent with what they say they believe. There are still people you can lead to the Lord in our culture, but the further away we drift into secularism, I'm convinced you have to push people to be consistent with what they say they believe and let the weight of reality crush false worldviews. So when he said, it's a matter of valuing all life, what's your question? Very good. What's his position on abortion? Let's see what he has to say. That brings up a couple of other questions, okay? Going back to John Robbins, I heard him speak, and then it was a press conference, and I heard some press people asking questions. One guy stood up and he asked this question. I'm going to ask you. You obviously feel very passionate about life, okay? You speak passionately about all life, okay? And doing as little harm as possible. And the question is, then what's your position on the issue of abortion, for example?
I think that's a whole different issue, and it's a tough one for me to get in. I have my own opinions on that, but I think it's kind of a separate issue. I think it comes down to the life of a fetus versus a woman's choice to do what she wants with her body, and I think there are pros and cons as far as looking at life on both sides. And so I think it's a sticky issue. It's one we as an organization don't take a stand on publicly, and because I think there really are two sides to that story, and I personally have difficulty coming on with either view because I think both sides have a lot of arguments.
Are there two sides to that issue? There are two sides to any issue. The problem with this one, any compromise position still ends up with a dead baby. Ideas have consequences. This next interview is one I call, What Do You Say to a Naked Lady? It's okay. Just bear with me. Probably not the best choice of words.
Our Mountaineer Ranch, we are a family nudist resort. We've been located in Colorado for 64 years now. We're the only nudist resort in the Rocky Mountain region. Purpose of our mission is just to allow people to be free and get comfortable with themselves and to accept their bodies the way they are.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. The question is, it comes back to, I guess, the nature of man. Is man basically good, or is man inherently flawed? Because we don't walk around the streets naked, okay? And nearly every culture has some form of clothing or what they would consider to be modest attire. And it varies, I agree. But why do we wear clothes? Is it because we are trained to wear clothes, or is it because it's natural for us to cover our nakedness?
I think we're trained to wear clothes. I think we're trained to be ashamed of what we are, and I think the media teaches us that if we're not perfect, we shouldn't expose ourselves.
So would you say that people are inherently good by nature or inherently flawed by nature?
I think people are inherently good. I have absolutely no belief in the inherent evil of humankind.
You see, it always does come back to one of those two basic questions. In this case, what is the nature of man? And every other worldview out there says that man is basically good. There's only one worldview that tells us that man is inherently flawed, that man tends towards the evil, and that's a biblical Christian worldview. This next interview is with someone who's promoting Lord Maitreya. I'll let him speak for himself.
International, and it's an organization that's sharing the information on the return of Maitreya, the Christ, or as the Buddhists expect, the fifth Buddha, by the name of Maitreya. He also wants to be known as the world teacher, and we're just pulling together all the miracles in the world that have been happening. The milk drinking statue of Ganesh, which happened in 1995, the milk would just disappear if you offered it milk. The crosses of light that are appearing in people's windows, and the image of Madonna that appeared in a building in Clearwater, Florida. And we're just pulling this all together to say that something greater is happening, than indeed that what Benjamin Creme has been traveling the world for 26 years has been speaking about, that Maitreya is actually living in London as an ordinary person, but obviously an extraordinary person. And he's not confined to London, because he can be all over the world, and indeed appears to individuals and groups alike in order to inspire them.
And how do you know that Maitreya exists? I mean, you personally, how do you know that what you're saying is true?
Personally, it makes so much sense into my heart. It just strikes a chord of truth. I have not had any personal experiences of the masters or Maitreya, but people that I work with have, and I know from their stories that they relate to me, it just makes sense that it's true.
How does he know that what he's saying is true? He said it makes so much sense in his heart. It strikes a chord of truth. You know what's so sad about that? I've heard Christians give the exact same reason for why they believe that Christianity is true. That is an inch deep and a mile wide answer. If that's the case, then we're no different than any other worldview out there. It's just another choice on the smorgasbord of worldviews. Our answer needs to be a mile deep and a mile wide.
Of course, all the religions and cultures point to this time and expect a world teacher or some type of figure to come back to lead us out of here. He says we have to do the work, but he's here to point the way. And he doesn't come alone. He comes with the Master Jesus, and he comes with Sai Baba, who's already here in the world, and you could go see him tomorrow. And if you ask Sai Baba if this is true, he will say this is true. And Sai Baba, if you know about him, that carries an awful lot of clout.
Okay, now tell us who Sai Baba is.
Sai Baba is an avatar, is a cosmic avatar.
And what do you mean by avatar?
A person that stands in or is an embodiment of energy for this planet. Is here to help us through this transition along with Maitreya. He's really what I would call a cosmic Christ, and Maitreya is a planetary Christ.
Notice, he's not afraid to talk about spiritual things. In fact, he even used the J word. But be cautious when someone comes preaching a different Jesus, Scripture tells us.
That brings up a question, and the question that we have is, well, we see people starving, we see conflicts, so is the nature of man inherently good and he's just been misdirected, or is he inherently evil?
It's inherently good, and it's important to keep in mind that we make more good karma than bad karma. And yes,
And what do you mean by karma?
oh, our actions, what we do in the world, the law of cause and effect, and how we treat our neighbors, what comes back to us.
Well, according to his worldview, his karma runs over my dogma. What's he going to do with the person of Jesus Christ? Who is he?
So, you mentioned Jesus Christ, but in the Bible, Jesus Christ said that he is the way, the truth, the life. No man comes to the Father except through him, which is pretty exclusive. But now you're saying that Maitreya is another incarnation of the Christ, and Jesus was one of the incarnations. Is that correct?
I believe that everyone can embody that principle, that Christ energy or Christ consciousness. And Maitreya was the first among all of us long ago to accomplish that divinity. And he says we all have that capacity. Now, the Bible is a beautiful book and has beautiful teachings, but I think revelation of that sort has come through many great teachings, and that is not the only path back to God. I think you can even be of non-religion and be a beautiful person and evolve and become divine as well.
The final question is, of course, what happens when you die? What do you think he says when it asks that question? Now, some of you are saying, Bill, I paid good money for this class, and you didn't fill in all the blanks. You left one blank empty. And that's the final question. From a secular perspective, what happens when you die? Well, when one dies, it's merely the end. But nobody likes this. How do I know that? Because Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has set eternity in man's heart. Everybody wants more than just this life. So why don't people turn naturally to Jesus Christ, the source of light and love? Because Scripture also tells us that men love darkness rather than light. And so what they're doing is they're leaping 180 degrees in the opposite direction, and they are embracing what is commonly called the New Age movement, which is what is represented here. It is secularism with the occult attached. And here is the response to what happens when you die from that worldview.
So what happens when someone dies? Because that's the ultimate spiritual question. You're talking about spiritual things, and the ultimate question that people have to face is what happens when you die? So what do you think happens when you die?
In my opinion, from what I understand and from what Maitreya says, is that there's a process of reincarnation, and that we come back over and over and over again in order to perfect ourselves, in order to become divine. Where you go and what it's like, I don't know. I haven't had a near-death experience, but from all the literature and things that I've read, I think it's a fairly wonderful place, and it's nothing to be feared, that's for sure.
This last interview is with the Gender Identity Society. And I had no idea what that was. Well, it turns out to be very ugly men dressed as very ugly women, as you will soon see.
Gender Identity Center of Colorado. We are a transgendered support group, peer support group thing. We're a nonprofit corporation. We've been providing support, education, and outreach, and also advocacy to the transgendered community, their friends and family, for the past 20 years. We're probably one of the premier transgender organizations in the entire United States. And we're here to do education and outreach to the general public so that they'll know a little bit more about us. They'll become more understanding and more tolerant of people that are transgendered. Transgendered is an umbrella term that includes anyone that does not conform to traditional gender stereotypes for whatever reason.
And what are you going to do with this group? Would you expect to hear any truth from the people in this group? Listen carefully.
Basically good or basically evil when he's born?
Every person in this world, according to what the Bible says, is a sinner.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to come to know Jesus Christ as their personal Savior and Lord.
So what happens when a person dies?
When they do that, then they are able to actually begin to connect with the Holy Spirit so that He can help them to live the rest of their life in a productive manner, bringing blessing into the lives of many people. I live my life by 7 words: love God, love others, enjoy the moment.
And I'm not sure you heard my question. What happens when you die?
When a person dies, their spirit and their soul is separated from their physical body and goes to one of 2 places, depending on whether they know Christ.
Okay.
Would you have expected to hear that from that guy? And yes, that was a man at that booth. That was a very clear articulation of a biblical worldview. And I submit that that man may very well have trusted Christ. Is he, however, living consistently with a biblical worldview? Everybody look at me and say, no. That is why it is imperative to train Christians to think and live in accord with the biblical worldview. That is why it is imperative to teach worldviews. A warning before we get started. The following questions I'm going to teach you are to be used as a crowbar to pry open people's minds, rather than as a sledgehammer to bash people. Use these questions wisely as a crowbar, and they will stand you in good stead no matter the topic of the conversation. Even the great philosophers have understood the benefit of asking questions. Aristotle said, "Those who wish to succeed must ask the right preliminary, the right beginning questions." Jesus often used questions to expose the faulty worldview and nefarious intentions of those in leadership. By asking questions, you are in control of the conversation and can guide people to question their underlying assumptions. So, this is a short course in analytical thinking. If I were to ask you, go out to my car and bring me back the right-handed thingamajig, you certainly would ask me, what do you mean by the right-handed thingamajig? If you did not, you might drag back the left-handed whatchamacallit. Awkward. The first question any thinking person should ask when told anything is, what do you mean by what you are saying? Let's say, for example, you're at the mall sharing your faith, which is why everyone goes to the mall, right? And you start telling someone about Jesus, and the person says, whoa, stop, I'm already a Christian. The question to ask is, what do you mean by Christian? If he is, he should be able to tell you, but if he is not, you'll find out rather rapidly. See the beauty in asking this question? By the way, that brings me to warning number 2. After this session today, I hope you are never a nice Christian again. Very good. You're thinking, what does Bill mean by nice? Nice comes from 2 Latin parts. The root is the word scire, which means to know. But the prefix is the prefix ne, which means not. Therefore, the original intention of the word nice was ignorant. I don't think Christians ought to be ignorant of anything that goes on around them. After this session, I hope you're never a nice Christian again. And by the way, Jesus wasn't a nice guy. When the woman caught in the act of adultery was dragged before him, he did not excuse her behavior, but he told her to go and sin no more. That wasn't nice. He also called the religious leaders of his day whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones. That's equivalent to us cursing a well-known religious leader in our day. Jesus was certainly being truthful, but was he being loving? Yes, in both instances, because you love God more than the praises of men. Christians should never be ignorant of what goes on around them, nor so pleasant that they fail to confront people with the truth. Christians are called to speak the truth in love, but they can only do so if empowered by the Holy Spirit. The next question stops most discussions on any topic. It is the killer question. It is, how do you know that what you are saying is true? If you get past this question, and you very seldom if ever do, the next question is also a great question to ask. It is, what difference does what you are saying make in your life? Or a shorthand version is, so what? Finally, the last question is also a killer question. What if you're wrong about what you are saying? These are the 4 questions. Easy to learn, but what's the hard part? It is, of course, putting them into practice. How many of you recall the first time you used a hammer to drive a nail? What did you end up driving? These nails. Using a hammer is not that difficult. It just requires a little practice. So, we're going to practice getting your hands and mind around the questions by interviewing a humanist and an atheist. Do you have a question for me? You should immediately be asking, what do you mean by humanist? Well, the two big questions that frame one's worldview are, what is the nature of God and what is the nature of man? A humanist responds that man is basically good and that God is either irrelevant or non-existent, which then makes him also an atheist. I'm going to start these interviews with what I consider to be a great spiritual conversation starter. What happens when you die? Let's see how the conversations unfold as I try to use these questions to pry open people's minds.
The camera
hey,
lens up.
how about
That's
that?
not going to be any good.
Hey, there you are.
What channel are you working
It's
for?
a black
you're
house. Hey, wait a second here. Okay, so we're just doing interviews. Tell us the name of your booth, and if you would, answer one question for us, okay? And the question is, what happens when you die? Okay?
How about that? Well, this is a booth of the Humanists of Colorado, and we are a part of the American Humanist Association, which is international in scope, actually. To answer your question, we don't know, so it doesn't make any difference to us what happens after we die. But I think that we go to dust. Even the scriptures say we come from dirt and we return to dust, to dirt when we die. I plan to be cremated, so my ashes will become dirt fairly quickly instead of waiting for the worms to destroy my body.
The question to ask, of course, is, what if you're wrong about what you believe? You don't have to ask the questions in any particular order.
Well, there's a follow-up question to that, of course.
All right.
And you know the follow-up question would be, what if you're wrong about what you believe?
Then that's right. Maybe I'd better join the group so I'll secure my eternal salvation. No, if we are wrong, then it doesn't make any difference, because as humanists, we feel a responsibility to human life, to the environment, to the world in which we live, because it's the only one we're going to experience here anyway. If there's an afterlife, then it's not in our control, and whatever force there is will determine what happens to us.
Okay, thanks a lot.
If we live a good life,
Oh, go ahead.
you know, if we live a good life and we believe that we do have a responsibility to build our own personal ethics and morality, so we should be acceptable to any eternal force.
Notice I was ready to leave. I said thank you very much. But he added, if we live a good life. That begs the question, what do you mean by good? How do you determine what is good?
The question would then be, how do you determine what is good?
We all do that individually. We all, it's situation ethics. The Christian conservative would not accede to that kind of a statement, but we as humanists would, that it's a situation. It's determined by the situation itself, what is right or wrong about that for me.
It's up to the individual. It depends upon the situation. What's he going to do with a villain like Hitler, an individual who, because of the situation, chose to do evil? He's not going to say that what Hitler did to the Jews is right, is he?
But then I'd have to ask you the question that you've been hit with before, I'm sure, and that is, you're not going to say that Hitler was right in what he did to the Jews, would you?
No, absolutely not.
Whoa! Absolutely is the key word here. He's already told me he's a humanist, and he denies that there are any absolutes. How do you know Hitler was wrong?
What's your standard then? Because you just told me that it's what the individual determines is right or wrong, and Hitler determined, or Charlie Manson determined, it was right to kill somebody. Right. How are you going to respond to that action?
There are, I don't want to say that there's a universal ethic, but in human society, and humanists believe that we are responsible for ourselves and our community. In human society, there are certain things that are right. We don't, the commandment itself, we don't kill our neighbor.
Whoa! To what did he just refer? The Bible. And yet he's already told me he's a humanist, and a humanist denies anything supernatural. And yet the Bible claims to be the supernaturally revealed Word of God. This man is stealing lumber from my worldview to build his. And stealing is a no-no, unless, of course, you happen to be a humanist. Let's see what happens.
We don't try to destroy human life. Some of us have a real question about capital punishment, for example. And certainly Hitler was wrong. Genocide is wrong no matter where it comes from.
Genocide is the killing of a so-called race or a certain group of people. But he says genocide is wrong no matter where it comes from. How do you know?
Okay. I'm going to stop there because, again, the question would be, how do you know that genocide is wrong? How do you know that murder is wrong? How do you know that Charlie Manson or Hitler or anybody is wrong? Because what you've got is you have set up, if I'm not mistaken, a universal absolute. Are there absolutes?
If there was an absolute, it would be the responsibility we have to each other and to our community. And that would, of course, mean that to kill is wrong.
So is it by majority opinion? Or is it a revealed absolute? Or is it innate in every person? What?
Instead of just asking repeatedly, how do you know that what you're saying is true, I gave him a multiple guess test. Is it by majority opinion? Is it revealed, or is it born in the person? He can't choose revealed because he's a humanist. He chose majority opinion. Let's see what we can do with this one.
Humanism believes in a democratic ideal. Yeah, we go by a majority, but we would also go against the majority if we felt that if the decision of the majority was wrong, and we would accept the civic consequences of that.
We'll go with the majority when we think the majority is right. We'll go against the majority when we think the majority is wrong. How do you know? How do you know when the majority is right and when the majority is wrong? You constantly have to push them back to that question because that's known as epistemology, the study of how you know anything to be true.
But again, I'm still stuck on this. It's a problem, okay? I don't mean to, I'm not trying to badger you, okay? Okay. How do you know what is right and what is wrong? You see, that's my dilemma in asking the question.
I will say again that I am responsible for what happens in my life. That I am responsible to my community, to myself, to the world in which I live, to the environment. If you want to call that an absolute, then each of us is going to make a decision about what is absolute for themselves. I don't say that there is an absolute for everybody. I have made the decision for myself. And humanists generally have the same point of view, that we are responsible for ourselves and for our world. But you know, that would be the closest thing to an absolute that I would agree to.
Okay, thanks.
If you recall the Charlie Brown cartoons, you never saw the adults except from the waist down, and they all sounded like this, wah, 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 which is exactly what you heard here. This man was the regional director of the American Humanist Association, but did you see how the questions exposed his faulty thinking? This next interview is with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They used to have a big water jug. If you dropped a coin in the neck and it floated down and hit a little plastic statue, which they called Jesus, on the head, they'd give you a free bumper sticker. The bumper sticker read, "Jesus doesn't love you." They're very nice people, as you will soon see.
We would call the Caleb campaign. People one simple question, okay? And whichever one of you wants to answer it can, okay? The question is, what happens when you die?
You rot like any other animal.
Okay, what if you're wrong about what you believe?
I'm not wrong what I believe.
Well, how do you know that to be true?
Because I'm intelligent.
Excuse me, you're saying that you know that you rot when you die?
You
How do you know that to be true? You're saying you're intelligent, okay? I don't doubt that, but you're finite. You haven't lived forever, right?
I haven't lived forever, no.
Okay, and you haven't been everywhere in the universe, right?
I've been on Earth, that's about all.
Okay. So how do you know for certain that you're correct in what you're saying that happens when you die?
Because I'm a person who knows how to think, and I'm not persuaded by a book that was written thousands of years ago.
Excuse me, why would we be any different than any other living organism? Everything that dies rots.
And then that's it? You're just the physical body?
I have no problem with that. I'm not afraid of that. I'd rather that than some pie-in-the-sky fantasy and illusion, or the horror that somebody knows that I had a terrible thought and therefore I'll rot forever after, or burn in hell.
Okay, what happens if you're wrong?
What happens if I'm wrong? What happens if you're wrong? How can I answer a silly question like that?
Notice she turned the questions on me. These aren't Christian questions. In any sport, the best defense is a good offense. When you're asking questions, you're on the offensive. When you're answering, you're on the defensive, and you want to be on the offensive. So when somebody asks you, how do you know that what you're saying is true? I suggest, to get back on the offensive, you add this question to your list. What would you accept as evidence? I'll find out if the person is serious or just playing head games with me. In this particular instance, I didn't think of that question, and I said, I ask you first. Not the best response. She also said, how can I answer a silly question like that? Now, just because she can't answer it doesn't make it a silly question.
Well, the question is, what if you're wrong?
But what if you're wrong? What's the answer?
That's a nice try, but I ask you first.
No, I don't think that works. You don't know whether you're wrong. I don't. What happens if you're wrong? What happens if I'm
So, wait a minute. You said you don't know if you're wrong, and I don't know if I'm wrong.
No, I said you can't. You're saying I can't prove that I'm right.
No, I just ask what happens if you're wrong.
You're suggesting I should live my life based on your, what is your possibility?
Wait. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking a question. What happens if you're wrong? Answer the question.
Like I said, what happens if you're wrong?
What?
We're not wrong.
How do you know?
Because I know I'm wrong, because I'm intelligent, where your mind is 5,000 years ago. You're still living in the Dark Ages.
Wait, I'm just asking a question. You are making accusations. I'm just asking you a question. How do you know that what you believe is true?
Because they're no different than any other living organism on Earth. When something dies, they rot, they become an organic matter, and that's all.
So therefore, why are you out trying to convince people that they're wrong?
We're not trying to convince you, we're trying to stop you from pushing your beliefs on everybody else.
Really?
That's right.
How are you trying to stop us from pushing our beliefs on everybody else?
By lawsuits, by legislation, anything that comes about.
If all that happens is you're born, you live, you die, you rot, you stink and become extinct, what difference does it make what you believe between the time you're born and the time you die?
But it's interesting because you said that all that happens is that when you die, you rot.
Exactly.
So what difference does it make what a person believes in this life?
We're talking about legislation about forcing women to go through birth if they don't want it, forcing public school children to pray in school, to force your beliefs on all Americans just because of what you believe.
Well, aren't there other people who are out there trying to force their beliefs on other Americans?
Yes, there are, and there are people that are trying to stop them also.
So why aren't you trying to stop all those people?
We only stop the ones that are a threat to our society as Americans.
This atheist understands that Christianity is a threat to the world system. Unfortunately, most Christians have succumbed to the gospel of niceness.
How do you know it's a threat? If all we do is just die and we rot, how can anything be a threat to society?
First of all, you keep changing the subject. You go from political matters to science matters and religious matters.
Actually, you're the one changing the subject, because I asked you what happens when you die, and then you said you want to stop people from forcing their beliefs on everybody else. That's your purpose of your booth or your organization. All I'm asking is, what if you're wrong about what you believe and you die?
Well, I'm not wrong what I believe when you die. When you die, you rot and become organic matter. Period.
Yeah, that's right.
But how do you know that?
How do I know that? Because I am Because of my intelligence, I know that. And if I don't have all day to discuss,
So you know everything?
no one knows everything.
So there's a possibility that you could be wrong?
When it comes to religious matters, I'm correct. And I've been correct in my preteens, and I'm correct now.
I understand it's humorous when he says, I'm intelligent. But I can't laugh at it because this man is now a friend of mine. Now, their position is worthy of mocking. But it's far different to look someone in the eyes and see the pain and the bitterness and even the anger, because then you cannot hate them. Use the questions as a crowbar, not a sledgehammer.